Welcome back to the channel. My name's Shane. Today we're going to be taking a look at this valve chest and all of the different valves associated with it that I'll be removing in this one. I will not in this video be removing or disassembling the spool valve here or the TCU valve underneath the valve chest. I will show them to you, but I won't be removing them. Basically what happens is the control arm connects to this with that distance piece and this runs through that assembly you saw in the quadrant in the last video. And when you move the control lever back and forth, it operates this connecting link back and forth. As you move it, it operates a arm underneath that presses up against the bottom of this spool valve right here, pushing it up or letting it return down. There is a spring inside of here that when you remove pressure, it pulls it back down. You push that way, it raises the spool valve up. When the spool valve is in a down position, the arms will raise upward. When the spool valve comes up, the arms will go down. In the case of the 990 we have down at my old home place, we've got another David Brown 990 down there. In the case of it, the spool valve is stuck in the down position. It's probably rusted in place. The oil in it is fairly milky last time I looked at it. And this spool valve is stuck in a down position. No matter what you do with the connecting link here and the control lever, it will not move this spool valve. So when it's in a down position like this, those arms are just going to shoot straight up when you turn the tractor on. I'll take you through the descriptions of what these valves do according to the book. I'll put a picture of what I'm reading through here on the screen. This is the bypass valve. It controls lift. This is the hold valve. It controls hold and lowering. This is the spool valve. It controls the operation of the hold and bypass valves. The arm, the connecting link, and the control lever operate an arm underneath that pushes up against that spool valve. This is the hold relief valve. It relieves shock loading in the hold circuit. This one on the front here is the latching valve. It amplifies a signal from the spool valve to provide positive closing of the bypass valve. On the side, turn this to where you can see from a top view. This is the rate of lowering valve, this one right here. It controls the release of oil through the hold valve to the reservoir. This is the non-return valve, and it prevents feedback between the hold and lift circuits. Underneath, you can see how when this arm is pushed back into the housing here, it operates this lever that pushes against the bottom of the spool valve, pushing it up. You can kind of see the spring right there on the spool valve a little bit as well. The spool valve has a number etched on the bottom of it. In my case, mine is 99. That tells you how many thousandths that the spool valve should move in the bore, and you control that by this nut and the lock nut on top of it. On the front here of the chest, we have this valve that operates the lowering control knob. Basically, if you screw it outwards, it will allow your arms to go down faster and oil will escape through this slot here, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments on that, but as you screw this in, it tightens up inside the bore. As you unscrew it, it lets more and more oil out. Go ahead and remove that here. That is that needle valve. Place it over here out of the way. Talked about using a drag link socket in the last video to remove the plugs for the bypass and hold valve. This works really well. It fills the slot. Let's see if I can get that off. I didn't tighten these up very much the last time I did it. Just want to go ahead and undo those. I'll start with the bypass valve. This is the one that needs cleaning out the most and is essential for the lift on your tractor to work. We have a plug and a sealing washer. Next, there is a spring. A magnet does pretty well at getting this valve out if it's free to get out and if it's free in the bore. There is a plug down in this valve that is a threaded brass plug. If this valve is stuck in the bore, you can unscrew that plug, bring it out, and thread in, I think, a 7/16 UNC bolt and use that bolt to get it out. I'm not sure on the thread size on that, but a UNC bolt can be threaded into that and let you use some outward force to pop that valve out of there. In my case, though, mine is pretty good. I hope. Yeah, it's coming up. That is the bypass valve. We then stick a screwdriver in there, flathead, and unscrew this plug. Be very careful with the items that are in this valve. I'll set this to the side for now because you see on the bottom of this, it came out with it. This is one of the most important pieces of the hydraulic lift on your tractor. This is a restrictor washer that has a 20 thousandths hole in it. Do not, under any circumstances, put anything into that hole that would potentially make it any larger. This has to be the correct size for your lift to work. It's such a small thing for such an important piece of your tractor. So we then have plug, this washer, this restrictor washer, and then down inside of there is a nylon screen. Mine was very badly damaged at one point. You can use a piece of wire or some compressed air or something to pop that out. And there's that nylon screen. And your valve should now be empty. That's the bypass valve. Plug and sealing washer, spring, brass plug that's threaded, the restrictor washer that has a 20 thousandths hole in it, nylon screen, and the valve itself. The components inside of your bypass valve may vary based on the year model of your tractor. In newer tractors, there could be different components inside, and I will put up a picture here of what this service manual shows as the 4 different types of bypass valve components. So just make a note of that. Yours may be a little bit different than mine. All right, let's move on to the hold valve. These 2 valves are the ones that are accessible from the top of the tractor without taking anything out. So we have a plug, and a sealing washer, just like the bypass valve. We have a spring, again, use a magnet to get in here. Try to get this valve up. Once you get it stuck on there, a bit of a snatching motion upwards will help. All right, there's the plunger for the hold valve. To get in there and get that. On this one, this has 3 holes. Just remember, the one that has 3 holes goes inside of the hold valve. There's supposed to be a ball bearing, a steel ball down in here. Mine does not have that. It fell out years ago, I guess. And I think it has something to do with the operation of the TCU valve, but I don't have that steel ball. I may try to source one and get it back in there. So just be aware that I do have a piece missing out of here. It doesn't really impact the operation of height control and depth control, which is pretty much what I use. Plug, spring, disc with the 3 holes, and the valve plunger itself. This is the components I have for the hold valve. Again, I do have missing the steel ball that would go right there. Next is the hold relief valve, and this relieves the shock loading in the hold circuit. Apparently my drag link socket fits in that hole pretty well too. There we go. Don't want to mess those slots up. And here we should have the spring, a plunger, a shim, a seat, and a restrictor washer. I've never been in here before. Plug. Spring. And the plunger is inside the spring here. This is dirty. There should be a shim and a seat down in there. There's a set of shims, 1, 2, 3 so far. That is dirty down in there. Glad I took this apart. I should have rewatched Barry's video on taking all these out before I did this. I've watched it several times. I'm giving your channel lots of views, Barry. Reviewing, re-reviewing, looking at what you've done. I don't know if I should be down in there with a metal pick or not. It's just stuck. Oh, there it goes. Haha. There it comes. Ha, yes. It was stuck. Perseverance and a magnet. Yeah, it's probably not a good idea to go down in there and start start poking around with a metal stick, because again, that has a very tight tolerance hole in it. It's probably a bad idea on my part to do that. It seems like this is, no, it's not. It's not stuck together. It was stuck together, but it's not. It is two pieces. Okay, so there we go. That's out. We have the seat that this sits down inside. And the restrictor washer. Okay, so hold relief valve, plug, spring, plunger, shims, the seat, and a restrictor washer. There were 3 shims there on mine. Do not lose those shims. All right. This is the rate of lowering valve. Make sure of that. Yes, this is the rate of lowering valve. Bigger screwdriver. No, that was not tight on there at all. You have a plug, a spring, and down inside we have a plunger. Let's see, how am I going to get that out of there? Let's try some hemostats. I think Barry, this is the one Barry had such problems getting out. Oh yeah, mine's not stuck at all. It's the plunger for the rate of lowering valve. It's just right there. 1, 2, 3 parts. I've got a parts diagram and control valve assembly that I'm referencing here in my T Select-O-Matic hydraulic system manual. I'll put a picture of that up on the screen here that I'm using. All right, rate of lowering valve is disassembled. And we have 2 valves left. This one and the one on the front here. Let's go for the one on the front. This is the latching valve. Plug for the latching valve. Should have a spring inside. and should have a plunger as well. I'll use that same pair of hemostats. I think this is what these are called. These are really useful for grabbing stuff. There's the plunger for the latching valve. The manual says there are only 3 parts in there: the plug, the spring, and the valve itself. Latching valve, plunger. The head on this appears to be 15/16. All right, there should be 4 components in here: a plug, a sealing washer, the spring, and a plunger. Plug, sealing washer, spring, and there should be a plunger right there. Plunger is empty, there's nothing inside of it, and there's no hole that I can see on the bottom there. When I was cleaning up and spraying stuff around in here, I was also putting my magnet down in here to see if there was any metallic particles and that kind of thing down in here. And when I was raising my magnet up in this non-return valve, I caught the edge of something and it moved. Interesting. Bagged and tagged the non-return valve. I want to make a quick edit to what I told you guys earlier when I had this stuff laid out. Yes, there is the plug, spring, and the plunger for the non-return valve. But the diagram in the V, as in Victor, Selectomatic hydraulic manual also showed this, which stayed in the bore when you saw me remove this stuff. This sits down in there at the bottom. It's kind of a distance piece or some kind of collar. It's not on the parts list in the T Selectomatic hydraulic system manual. The valve slides right through the valve plunger. So that sits down in the bore on the plunger. I'm not going to disassemble the spool valve. If you'd like to see how the spool valve is disassembled, go watch Barry's videos of where he disassembles this and puts it back together. I will link to one of those videos up here in the corner. Mine works great and it's not broke, so I'm not going to even attempt to try to fix it because there's nothing to fix. The TCU valve on the bottom as well, I'm not going to disassemble. TCU valve is right there. This is the bottom of the spool valve. For the adjustments of these, you have to have a special tool. I haven't made one as of yet. I do want to check these, check the tolerances in here, so I may have one made or make one myself. Barry's also got a video where he goes through the special tool that you make to hook onto this part of the shaft, and it puts it at various depths which operate this lever, and then you check with feeler gauges to make sure that it's within specs. So he's got a video to that on how to do the adjustments. Again, I'll put a link right up there, I think, to that video. Please check that out. In fact, check out all of Barry's videos. He's taking a David Brown 990 from basically pieces and parts and putting it back together. let's go through these real quick. Non-return valve, plug, spring, plunger. Latching valve, plug, spring, plunger. Rate of lowering valve, plug, spring, plunger. Hold relief valve, plug, spring, plunger. Shims, seat, restrictor washer. Hold valve, plug, sealing washer, spring, 3-hole plate that holds the ball that is missing on mine, and the plunger. And finally, the bypass valve, plug and sealing washer, spring, brass threaded insert, 20 thousandths restrictor washer, nylon screen, and the plunger. Those are the ones that I'm taking out to clean up my valve chest. I'll blow compressed air through that. I'll spray it with some brake cleaner down in the bores, spray it with compressed air, oil it up, and reassemble everything. Bypass valve, if you've got one of the early Selectomatics like mine and you've just got that screen at the bottom, you don't have a full flow filter, one thing that might happen is that trash may come up through and get captured by that nylon screen right there. So cleaning that out is something you may have to do once every, 10, 20 years. First time I cleaned this out, this nylon screen was actually almost disintegrated. This is actually a new one. They are available. I think David Brown Parts has them. Barclay Williams may have them. I think I sourced this off Amazon or eBay. I use Ziploc snap bags for the valve parts, individually bagged and tagged, and then stick them in a quart bag. Like so. Keep everything together, organized, and labeled. Okay, so I have a dial indicator hooked up here to the top of the spool valve. I've got it zeroed out at 0. Repeatability. Okay. What we will do now is we will push on the back of the spool valve right here. Can't really see it from this back video, but you'll be able to see me pushing on it back here. We'll push on the back of the bottom of the spool valve, and you'll be able to see what the traveled is on it in thousandths. 99 is what's etched on the bottom of my spool valve. The book says that you're supposed to be right on target. However, the forum posts, the folks over there have said that be on target at whatever is etched on the bottom of the spool valve or plus 1,000th. You can't be any less than what's on the bottom of the spool valve, and you can't be any more plus 1,000th. So 99 is on mine. I should not be more than 100,000th. I should be 99 to 100 thousandths. One thing to do is make sure that if you've got all this still attached and you're checking the travel of your spool valve, ensure that this is pulled all the way up so that this arm is not touching the bottom of the spool valve. You don't want that causing an error in your measurement. Right on target. I am 100 thousandths. 99 is what's etched on the bottom of my spool valve. We can be 1,000th over. I am 1,000th over. I am not going to touch this spool valve. I am not going to loosen those lock nuts. I'm not going to remove it. There's no reason for me to take it apart and do anything with it. It seems like it is in great shape. Nice little dial indicator there. I've got the housing and everything flipped over here so you can see, again, the bottom of the spool valve here where I was pushing up against that with a screwdriver, pushing it into the bore. This is the TCU valve. Since my spool valve is basically perfect for what the measurements should be, I'm going to assume that this TCU valve is also good. I don't use TCU functions that much, or if ever. And when I push down on this connecting link, the screw does contact the TCU valve and push it in slightly. So I'm going to assume that that is all well and good. I've said this before, but I'll say it again. If you want to see the spool valve and the TCU valve taken out and reinserted, go take a look at Barry's videos. You can look up his channel. He's the Man from the Mist on YouTube. He's got a set of videos where he removes these and another video where he goes through the reinstallation process of the spool and TCU valve. He also does the adjustments. He does the adjustment on his spool valve just like you saw there, but he also does the adjustment on the TCU valve. I'm not going to take any of this apart because nothing around these two is nothing around the spool valve is wrong. I'm assuming nothing is wrong with the TCU valve since this is set up properly. And I'm not going to take any of this mess off. There's just no reason for it. No reason whatsoever. The spool valve here should be able to rotate in its bore. As you move it back and forth, you see it goes up and move this connecting link up back and forth inside the housing here. Again, it operates that lever that pushes on the bottom of the spool valve, moving it up and down. If you've got a stuck spool valve, you will not be able to turn it in the bore. You should be able to move that, I believe, in the bore. When I turn that, there's no grinding. I mean, it's a tight turn. I can turn it with my fingers. Those are lock nutted together, so I'm not worried about that. I'm grabbing both of those nuts. But I can turn that with my fingers. There's no grinding that I can feel in there. Once I get it to move, it's smooth. It is tight, trust me. I guess that's what that slot there's for. Here we go. So yeah, you can see the spool valve moving, turning in the bore. I have read that if you're having problems with your lift, the spool valve may be worn it may have been sitting in the same place operating for years, and it may just, the lands in it may be worn. And what I think they've recommended on the forums in the past, I'll have to go look this up to verify that before I put it in the video. One thing that they've recommended on the forums is turn the spool valve maybe 180 degrees, maybe 90 degrees, whatever, to get it into a place where it's not worn. It's basically like you've got a new spool valve. So you might want to try that if you're having problems with your lift. If you notice here, I did write the actual controls. I need to get some new decals. Depth, height, TCU. Again, it's not a show tractor. This will be fine. One day maybe I'll get the decals and repaint this thing and make it all pretty. But when it comes home after doing its work, it's muddy and dirty and gross. And I don't want to invest the money in all that decal stuff unless I'm going to let it just be a show tractor. Okay, so I have cleaned this thing out. I used brake cleaner down in the bores, sprayed it down in there, cleaned it up really well, I then took diesel fuel, poured all in it, and this thing's pretty clean. I didn't see any real issues in here. There was no real dirt down in bottoms of the bores, nothing there that would concern me any. All right, next step, reinstall all the valves. We'll start with the non-return valve. Remember, I did find this little collar that goes down in the bore. I also marked it with a Sharpie on top, so I know exactly which side, which way it came out and which way it was supposed to go back in. Oil down in the bore. If I remember correctly, this kind of caught on the threads coming out. There it goes. Make sure that's seated in there. Okie dokie. Next is the valve plunger for the non-return valve. It does have some wear on it. I would assume where that collar goes. The spring, the plug, and sealing washer. This was pretty tight down on there. Didn't see any specs in the manual for torque settings on these bolts and nuts and things and plugs to go in the valve chest, so I'm going to give it I'll give it a low setting on my impact driver here. Yeah, that's tight enough. All right, next, rate of lowering valve. The rate of lowering valve also, from a diagram perspective and all of that, also includes the needle valve that goes in front. We'll save the needle valve for last though. So there will be one component in here that, in this baggie, that stays in the bag for a little while. There's that needle valve. I'll make sure it stays in the bag for now. So 3 components. Oil these up. Okay. Nip that up. All right, now we'll do the latching valve that's on the front, right there. See if you can see that from that camera over there. You can. Good deal. All right, so let's throw some oil down in there first. disassemble the plunger. And I did clean up everything. There were no rust spots, no nothing that I saw on these, just some wear on a few of the plungers. I didn't use any kind of emery paper, sandpaper, any kind of thing like that. All this was all fairly clean. Right. Now for the hold relief valve, we have the plug, the spring, the plunger, the shims, the seat, and the restrictor washer. Just going to drop it down in there and see what happens. Hey, look at there. It went down in there. Just a little light tapping, make sure it's down in the hole. Happy with that. Now for the seat. A little oil on it. Yep. And then cattywampus. There we go. Seat is now down in there. Now on top of it, go the shims. 3 shims. Some sunlight bleeding in. Ooh, that did not go well. Got 1 shim. 2 shim. Okay, 1 shim is down in there. Let's try these one at a time instead of all 3. So I can tap them down in there. All right, there's 2. Big old fingers here. Getting in the way. All right, those are down there now. Good deal. A little squirt of oil. Never hurt anything. It's probably best to try to put it down there with something smaller. Love these hemostats because of that little thing right there, you can latch these. This gives enough to where it'll latch, but it'll grip as well. Love these things. It really wasn't needed in this case though. But it keeps my hands out of the way to where I can see. Spring goes on next. A little bit more oil. And finally the plug. Apparently that seat, or not the seat, the plunger actually comes up through to this hole in the plug. Just make sure everything is square in there. If I remember correctly, this one was a little bit tighter than hand pipe with a flathead screwdriver, so I use this drag link socket again. Just to put just a little extra oomph on it. Okay. All that seems to be okay, well and good. And finally, the last 2 we have bypass and hold valves. In the hold valve plunger, should be able to see daylight through it. This is dirty. You should blow it out with some compressed air. Again, I am missing the ball that goes down into here. So we'll put that little 3-hole plate in. Get it out in the sunlight and make sure I got it in there, which I didn't. Sorry, you can't see this. All right, that 3-hole plate is now down on there. Oil. Yeah. Actually, before I do that, all right. Spool valve plunger and the plates down in the bore. Now for the spring. And the plug. Sure it's tight. And finally, the bypass valve. This one controls lift on your tractor. All right, before we do that, we have to reassemble the insides. So for the bypass valve, first thing to go back in would be the nylon screen. Inspect it for damage before you do so. Earlier, you may have seen me use a piece of wire to go up into the end of the bypass valve here and kind of poke that nylon screen out. I was going up towards the edge of this nylon screen, trying to get to the edge right there to push it out. Do not go straight up in and push on the screen itself. It's not a good idea. You'll poke a hole in it. Use something to get it arranged in there. Again, don't poke down on that on the mesh itself. Find something that you could perhaps poke down in there that's flat to kind of push down on the edges of that nylon screen to get it to seat. Let's see if I can get the sunshine. There we go. You can see it down in the bore there. It's a little bit of sunshine coming through in this little spot. It's quite useful. You can see it right there really well. Okay, next is this very tiny restrictor washer. It has a 20 thousandths hole in it. Let me get that sunshine. There we go. That's kind of washed out. 20 thousandths hole in that. Do not, again, poke anything down in that hole or try to clean it out by pushing anything down in it. You do not want to damage this hole in any way, shape, or form. To clean it out, blow on it with some compressed air or your mouth or whatever. But really the only thing you have to do is blow that out. You should, if you hold it up to the sun, be able to see light through it. And we just drop it in. Next is the plug, threaded plug. Well, before I do that though, I'm gonna squirt some oil down in there. This is just 30 weight oil I'm using. And once it starts threading in, you'll feel it tighten up. That's in there. All right, now then. All right, that one's in. More oil. And finally refit the plug. Before we do this, before I tighten this up, I want to show you something real quick. On your tractor, these two plugs are accessible from that that plate that's on the top. You take the plate off or take your dump valve off, whatever, and get to these valves. The bypass valve will need cleaning out from time to time to get trash out of, especially if your lift starts to mess up. Bypass valve is one of the first places to start. The problem is you've only got a space about this wide by this wide to work in, and it's down recessed inside of the casting on the tractor. One thing I have found to be useful is when you are unscrewing these for maintenance, it's just easier to see it here instead of me showing you this on the tractor. As soon as you get this plug off, stop. As soon as it's released off the thread, stop. Just let it sit there. And to keep from running the risk of losing this down in the axle housing, use a magnet and pop it up. Pop the plug off. Grab the sealing washer. Sometimes the spring will come with it, just like that. But try to use a magnet or something to keep you from having to get down in here with your fingers and fumble around with it and potentially lose it off of the edge of the valve chest here down into the axle casting. I like to be very careful not to lose things. Once that's on, switch over to the drag link socket to tighten it back up. All right. And last but not least, the needle valve for the lowering control knob. All right, all my valves are back in, cleaned up. Everything's good to go. I did wind up trying to make one of these T service tools. Kind of weird and all. I'm not a machinist for dang sure. This one down here wasn't right. I need to remake the whole thing. This was just my first attempt. I bought some sheet metal that was too thin. That was what I had available at the local hardware store, and it's just too thin. But it did get me pretty close on the top for looking at the abutment plate. I've already put my feeler gauges up, but I'll take you through the process here real quick. You basically hook the shaft there through the hole, to the top hole. Once you have this made to be correct and the top of the hole is at 0.437 inches, then you should be able to take a feeler gauge and measure in between the spool valve and this arm here, and the allowed distance should be between 1 and 3 thousandths between these two. Again, I need to redo this, but I'm not one. I want to go ahead and get this video out, but I did make the attempt. Look, I am confident that this is right. If I do raise this up just a bit, again, I didn't go high enough up to hit the right dimension. I need to use a set of files or something to get that in a better shape. It's too thin a metal anyway. But anyway, I'm rambling. If I raise this up just a hair, I can get a 1.5 thousandths feeler gauge right inside of there. So I'm very confident that this abutment plate is set correctly. Just like the spool valve, nobody has ever been in here to do any of these adjustments since it came from the factory in England. For the TCU valve adjustment, I'm not going to back this lock nut off and bring it back. If you want to see the process for setting this stuff up, go watch Barry's videos. I've got a bunch of links down in the description below. To his channel and the various things that he's done to adjust his. So watch those. Mine's set up right. I'm not going to disturb it for those very sensitive settings. What this process has shown me is how to do it. I do have to go down to our old home place and work on our other David Brown tractor down there. Again, I think I mentioned that the spool valve on it is stuck in the down position. So I will have to most likely take the spool valve out of there, get a punch on it or whatever to get that off. I may have to remove the abutment plate. So familiarizing myself now with this while it's out will help me when I go down there and have to do that work. So I'm really teaching myself with mine what all these adjustments do and how to do them, so I'm not, fumbling around down there. I think that does it for this video. I've done what I wanted to do. I've taken the valve chest out of the tractor. I've taken the plugs out of it and the valves that I need to get out. I haven't disturbed the TCU or spool valve. My spool valve measurements are correct for what I have the ability to measure. I'm not touching the TCU valve. The abutment plate, I'm confident, is set correctly with the right number of shims. So I'm happy with this. I've learned a lot about where things are, how things are set up, and I'm very happy with how this has turned out for me. If you've liked this kind of content, if you liked what I've done here, like and subscribe down below. Again, leave comments. If you've seen anything that I've done incorrectly here or need to address before I put it back in the tractor, it will be maybe a week or so before I put it back in the tractor. And so if you've seen anything that I need to address before I get it back inserted, let me know in the comments below. I love reading those comments from you guys, and it's good to interact with you guys. Thanks for watching.